So, early 2025. The U.S. financial scene feels, I don't know, a bit tense, doesn't it?
Yeah, like we're holding our breath. You definitely sense these strong currents pulling in opposite ways.
Exactly. And trying to figure it all out can feel, well, overwhelming.
That's it, precisely. It feels like a real transition year. You've got potential roadblocks, but also maybe some openings.
So today we're digging into some recent, pretty varied financial news stories.
Right. Everything from specific companies like Rite Aid to bigger trade policy shifts and even some, well, stark economic forecasts.
And the mission here is simple.
Yeah.
Pull out the key stuff so you can get a clear picture of the U.S. economy right now without drowning in jargon.
Exactly. Cut through the noise, get to the core insights.
Okay, let's dive in. First up, a name most people know, Rite Aid. They're closing all their stores this year. That seems huge.
It really is a massive change, and it signals, I think, more than just one company failing. Rite Aid was, a household name. They filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, tried to restructure, but ultimately they're liquidating. It just speaks volumes about the pressure on traditional retail, especially pharmacies.
They had a lot of debt, didn't they? And those opioid lawsuits.
Exactly. A heavy debt load, some tough strategic spots they were in, and yes, a huge burden from the opioid litigation. It all added up.
Okay, Chapter 11 bankruptcy. We hear that term, but what does it actually mean, simply? And why didn't it work for them?
Think of it like hitting pause financially. Chapter 11 lets a company keep the lights on, keep operating while they try to sort out their debts and hopefully find a path back to health.
Okay, a reorganization.
Right. But liquidation.
Yeah.
That's the end game. Selling off everything to pay back creditors as much as possible, and then, well, closing the doors.
So the fact Chapter 11 failed means?
It suggests the problems were just too deep. The debt, the changing way people shop, those lawsuits. Restructuring just couldn't fix it all.
So with Rite Aid gone, who really feels the pinch?
Well, first and foremost, thousands of job losses. That's a direct hit to people and communities.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then in the market, less competition. You've got CVS, Walgreens. They'll likely gain market share.
Makes sense.
And, it's just another sign, a really clear one, of how tough it is for brick-and-mortar stores, especially those dealing with online rivals and, like Rite Aid, specific industry challenges.
Okay, shifting from the corner store to the global stage.
Yeah.
There's this new big trade deal between the U.S. and the U.K.
Yeah, pretty significant, especially, after Brexit and all the talk about protectionism lately.
So why should we, or you listening, pay attention to this?
Well, trade deals actually affect us more than we might think. They determine how easily goods flow between countries,
Right.
which then influences prices we pay for stuff, imported goods, and it impacts businesses, their profits, maybe jobs, investment.
So this U.S.-U.K. one, what's the main thrust?
Lowering tariffs, those are the taxes on imports, and basically opening the doors wider for businesses in both countries to sell in the other's market.
So could my favorite British tea actually get cheaper?
Potentially. Yeah, lower tariffs often mean lower prices for imported goods. That's a direct win for consumers and for U.S. companies. Better chances to sell their stuff over in the U.K. could be a nice boost for them.
And there's a bigger picture, too. Diplomacy and stuff.
Right. These deals can strengthen relationships between countries, which tends to contribute to, a more stable economic environment globally.
But it's not like all tariffs are gone, right? The reports say it's more nuanced.
Correct. It seems like a step away from some recent protectionist moves, yes. But it looks like some tariffs are staying.
Why is that?
Probably on goods each country sees as strategically important. It lets governments keep some import revenue and maybe protect certain home industries, while still, freeing up trade overall between the two.
Interesting. So it's selective liberalization.
Pretty much. And this deal, while just US-UK might hint at a bigger shift, maybe Western allies realigning trade a bit in response to, global uncertainties.
Okay, now here's another trade headline that really caught my eye. Trump possibly thinking about lowering tariffs on China.
Yeah, that was definitely a surprise, given the previous very firm stance.
Totally. Reports mention maybe dropping them from, 145% down to 80%? What's the thinking there?
The stated reason, the official line, is its leverage, to try and get China to open its markets more to U.S. exports. The idea is lower the barrier for them, maybe they lower barriers for us, but, given the history, will China actually play ball? Or is it maybe a U.S. move for other reasons?
It's complex, and we've certainly seen how tariffs can ripple outwards, haven't we?
Oh, absolutely. They can shield domestic industries, sure. But the flip side is often higher prices for consumers on imported goods.
Right.
Plus, they mess with supply chains, and very often they spark retaliation. Other countries hit back with their own tariffs. Trade disputes flare up.
So if this potential China tariff cut happens, how do investors see it?
Generally, markets like the idea of lower trade barriers. Less friction, potentially smoother supply chains, maybe lower costs for companies using imports.
So positive.
Potentially positive reaction, yes, but. And it's a big but. It's such a change from the previous policy, and the details are fuzzy, that creates uncertainty.
And markets hate uncertainty.
Exactly. Investors get cautious when they get mixed signals like this.
Speaking of costs and prices,
Yeah.
Mattel, Barbie, Hot Wheels,
Yeah.
icons. They're warning about possible price hikes.
Yeah. Makes it very real, doesn't it?
And they're pointing fingers directly at new tariffs and unstable trade policy.
It's a perfect, tangible example. Shows how these big macroeconomic things, trade wars, tariffs, trickle right down to the price of a toy car.
They still make a lot of stuff in China.
A significant amount, yes. So they're squeezed by rising costs in China and then potentially by tariffs on bringing goods out of China. It hits their profit margins.
The report mentioned cost-push inflation. Can you break that down?
Sure. Basically, if it costs a company more to make something, maybe parts are pricier because of tariffs or labor costs go up, they might pass that extra cost onto us by raising the price of the final product. That's the push, the production costs pushing prices up.
Got it. But is there sometimes a risk companies just use tariffs as an excuse to hike prices even more?
That's always a debate, isn't it? How much is truly cost recovery versus opportunistic pricing?
Yeah.
Hard to say definitively sometimes.
And Mattel might be looking at supply chain diversification. What's that about?
It means not putting all your manufacturing eggs in one basket, basically. So instead of relying solely on China,
Right.
companies look for other places to make things, maybe Vietnam, Mexico, India, wherever. It makes them less vulnerable if something goes wrong in one specific place. Tariffs, political issues, even natural disasters.
But it's not easy to just switch factories.
No, it's complex, can be expensive up front, but long term, it can build resilience.
So Mattel's warning, it's a signpost for these broader economic jitters.
Precisely. It shows how company decisions are directly shaped by government policies like trade. And it highlights how sensitive global businesses are to political risk and these international dependencies.
Okay, now for maybe the most concerning bit of news. The Atlanta Fed's forecast. They're now predicting the economy actually shrank in the first quarter of 2025.
Yeah, that's a sharp revision. They're forecasting a contraction, negative growth of 1.5%. That's down significantly from their earlier forecast of positive 2.3% growth.
Wow. What's driving that sudden pessimism?
They point mainly to two things: weaker consumer spending, people just not buying as much,
Okay.
and a sharp drop in net exports. That's basically the difference between what the U.S. sells abroad versus what it buys from abroad.
So we're buying more than we're selling.
Looks like it, according to this forecast.
Mhm.
And when both domestic spending and net exports weaken, it really drags down the overall economic number, the GDP.
This potential downturn, could it just snowball? Like people hear bad news, get nervous, spend less, and that makes things worse.
That's definitely a risk. Consumer confidence is huge. Bad news can sometimes become a self-fulfilling prophecy if it makes everyone pull back.
So an economic contraction, is that a recession or are they different?
Good question. 1/4 of negative growth, like this forecast, is a contraction.
Okay.
A recession is typically defined as 2 consecutive quarters, so 6 months straight of negative GDP growth.
I see.
So this forecast, it definitely rings the alarm bells, raises the concern that, yeah, the U.S. might be heading towards or even already in a recession.
That's pretty serious. What should everyday people be thinking about if that's the case?
Well, potential job uncertainty, maybe companies slow down hiring or even cut back, less purchasing power if inflation stays sticky, credit might get tighter. It ripples through.
Okay, so we've looked at these individual stories, Rite Aid, trade deals, Mattel, the Fed forecast. The report ties them together with some overarching themes. Let's touch on those. First, trade policy volatility.
Yeah, this just keeps coming up, doesn't it? The sheer unpredictability, especially around tariffs, like the China situation, it gives the businesses a massive headache.
How so?
It's just really hard to plan. How do you forecast your costs, manage your supply chain, make big investment decisions when the rules of the game might change?
Right.
The US-UK deal provides some stability in one corridor, sure, but the uncertainty with China looms large over everything else.
So while some old-school businesses here are struggling, like Rite Aid, are there maybe potential bright spots from some of these global trade shifts?
It's possible lower tariffs with the UK could help certain exporters, but the overall picture is still dominated by that volatility risk, especially concerning China.
Okay, second theme. Consumer price pressures. We talked about Mattel, but it sounds broader.
It is. Even if headline inflation cools off a bit overall, these tariff-related costs and company warnings suggest we'll probably still feel pinched. Well, inflation in specific things you buy regularly, food, gas, maybe even toys, that hits your budget hard, even if the average number looks a bit better. It's the everyday costs.
Then there's corporate vulnerability and restructuring. Rite Aid is the poster child here, but is it just them?
Doesn't seem like it. Rite Aid looks like part of a wider trend. You see other established, maybe legacy companies struggling.
Why? What's the common thread?
Often it's a mix. Too much debt, maybe high fixed costs tied to older ways of doing business, and sometimes, frankly, just not adapting fast enough to how the world is changing, failing to innovate.
And finally, the big one. Potential recession and Fed policy, linked to that Atlanta Fed forecast.
Absolutely. That forecast really puts the R word, recession, front and center. If it pans out, if we get 2 negative quarters, then all eyes turn to the Federal Reserve, the central bank. Will they step in?
How will they do that? Cut interest rates?
That's their main tool, yes. Lowering interest rates generally encourages borrowing and spending, which can stimulate the economy.
But there are risks.
Always. It's a balancing act. Cut rates too soon or too much, and you risk weakening the dollar or maybe reigniting inflation later on. It's tricky.
Okay, so let's boil this down. For someone listening, maybe just trying to get a handle on basic finance, what are the absolute key takeaways from all of this?
Right. First, tariffs. Understand their taxes on imports, and they can affect prices and businesses. Simple, but crucial.
Got it.
Second, GDP. That's the big measure of the economy's health. Negative GDP means the economy is shrinking, which is a big deal.
Okay.
Third, bankruptcy. Chapter 11 is about reorganizing, trying to survive. Liquidation, like Rite Aid, means closing down. They aren't the same thing.
Important distinction.
Fourth, inflation. Prices going up. Remember, it can be driven by high demand or by rising production costs, like we saw with Mattel.
Right.
And finally, the Federal Reserve, the Fed. They use tools like interest rates to try and keep the economy stable. Their decisions matter a lot.
It's tough seeing those local impacts, like with the Rite Aid job losses.
It really brings it home, doesn't it? These big economic shifts have real-world consequences for people.
So, pulling it all together, mid-2025, it really feels like the U.S. economy is at maybe a tipping point.
That sums it up well. A real balancing act. You've got some potential pluses, like maybe that UK trade deal helps a bit, but also some serious flashing red lights, that contraction forecast, the ongoing price pressures, the struggles of some companies.
Opportunities mixed with significant warnings.
Exactly. It's a complex brew of forces right now. Lots of moving parts, lots of potential risks, alongside maybe some opportunities.
So maybe a final thought for you listening. As you look at your own finances, your own plans, how do these big picture shifts, trade uncertainty, potential price hikes factor into your thinking for the near future?
Yeah, definitely something to mull over as we all try to navigate what comes next.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.